Hi everyone, this is part 2 of our slabs to dining table. In this video we're going to be installing C-channel, filling the defects with epoxy, and trimming the table to its final length. So let's just get on with it. All right, step 1 is we're going to be trimming the table to its final length. Now, I always like to glue up with about 3 to 4 inches of extra length. That way, maybe you're going to take a 1/4 inch off one end and the remaining off the other, maybe even. I find sometimes with the glue ups, you can have a little gap at the very, very end, so you always want to have a little extra there. So I'm just going to measure out, probably mark about 2 inches on this end. I'll take another inch off that end. That way I'm getting rid of a little bit of this checking, and it didn't surface fully down here. So let's do it. Measuring time. So I've measured, I know where I want to cut. I'm going to square my track to the glue line. And we're going to cut. You don't have to, but we almost always remove the bark from the defects. So, just a little grunt work, hammer and chisel, whatever you can to get the bark out of there. Bark is removed from all the defects. Now we're going to flip the slab over, and I'm going to be pouring the epoxy from the top side. So on the underside of the table and the ends, we're going to tuck tape them off really, really, really well because we don't want the epoxy leaking out. Let's get this thing flipped over. Okay, we've used about half a roll of tuck tape. You really don't want your epoxy leaking. And we're going to flip this table over. We're going to get the epoxy. Simple. Try to lift your legs, not your back. All right, awesome. We like to put a moat around all the defects using Seal Max, also from AcFix. And I'm going to be using ChemTech epoxy. We're using Chem 100. So this will be sandable within 24 hours. I'm not going to fill the defect up fully. We're going to do about a 1/4 inch to about a 1/2 inch in thickness. That way there's less chance as the epoxy kicks over and heats up, it lets that tuck tape release. Also, there's less weight of epoxy there. In about 4 to 6 hours, we're going to be able to completely fill up these defects with a longer setting epoxy. So let's get to it. Oh, we got a little black drop. Our customer wants translucent, grayish epoxy. She wants to see into it, not completely black, but not completely clear. So I got some black drops. Ooh. Okay, on with the epoxy. We're using ChemTech Chem 100. It's a 2-part, 2-to-1 ratio. And I'm just going to estimate what I need. I got a mixing cup, a couple black drops to make it smoky gray. Let's get to it. Now you want to mix for about 5 to 10 minutes, scraping the sides of the container, scraping the bottom of the container. All right, the epoxy's all poured. Going to give it a quick blowtorch. With this epoxy, it doesn't fully release the micro bubbles, so I like giving it a quick little zap with the blowtorch. The other nice thing is that it makes the epoxy less viscous. I think that's the way to say it. More runny, so it's going to go into the defects a little bit easier. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to let this stuff cure for about 6 to 8 hours, and we're going to top up the larger defects. Just those two. That's it. All right, we topped up all the defects. It is now the next day. It's rock solid. I'm going to scrape off some of the silicone, flip it over, take off the tuck tape. And then, fortunately for us, you're going to watch it go through a wide belt sander. So I'll sit in a chair while a giant machine sands this thing. Shans it. So let's shans it already. All right, we're here at the wide belt sander. This is a Costa Series A. That's what it says anyways. Let's turn it on. You got a main power switch. We got a fancy computer screen here because the one that is supposed to be here was broken when I bought it. So they had a computer screen on it. It's hooked up to my air compressor. We got 20 horsepower air compressor. Uses a lot of air to clean the belts, to tension the belts, to move the belt back and forth. This bed is also on air. It uses a lot of air. So the 20 horsepower compressor I have is just enough air for it. It has a vacuum bed. So down here is a motor with a big fan on it. And it has little holes in the conveyor. So it actually sucks and holds the pieces down. Most of the stuff not too critical for, but especially epoxy pieces are very slippery. So very important to have the vacuum bed. It works really well. If you come over here, we have the inside. So there's two large sanding belts. The belt itself is 54 inches wide, and the machine can fit through wood that's 53 inches wide. Super handy to have two of them also, because we have an 80 grit on the first one and a 120 grit on the second one. The first one is a drum where it contacts the wood, where the second one comes down to a platen. So it actually comes around, it has a flat pad that pushes down on the wood and then comes back up. So a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more accurate and less aggressive. We're going to turn on the dust collection, wheel the table over, and get this thing set up. Okay, we finished up the wide belt sanding. Now we're going to install the C-channel. We do this using a jig, of course, a piece of C-channel. And if you're unfamiliar with our C-channel, we produce it ourselves. It's the best in the industry, laser cut, powder coated. It's beautiful, and it's available through all of our dealers. Link is below. You're going to need a router. Any router will do. If using the jig, we use a 1/2 inch brass bushing with a 1/4 inch spiral bit, and we're going to be using Rampatech threaded inserts and bolts to hold the C-channel in. So let's get on with it. I'm going to place my jig, and we're going to make some sawdust. So this is the jig that we're going to use. I like to put it flush with the end of the table. I have a center line on the jig that I drew myself, and I have some other lines that I drew for the different sizes of C-channel that we use. We're going to clamp it to the table and do this in typically 3 to 4 passes to a depth just over 3/4 of an inch deep. That's how deep the wings are for the C-channel. We're then going to mark for our inserts, drill with a 10mm drill bit, and bolt the C-channel in. How exciting. just before the inserts go in, we like putting a slight chamfer on that hole. So we got a little chamfer bit here. All right, so that's a wrap for part number 2. Please tune in to part number 3, where we're going to be doing the final finishing, dealing with the edges, as well as the top, and applying the finish. Super exciting. I guess it needs some legs too, so we'll put some legs on as well. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, please leave them below. If you got any suggestions for me on how I do my job, please let me know. I'll take the critiques, no problem. Everyone, make it a great one. We'll see you next time.